Hi, my name's Tyson and we're in the Flower Pot Mosaic studio. I'd like to welcome those of you who came along to my Christmas workshops at the National Exhibition Centre in Birmingham. I hope you've enjoyed your workshop, and now it's time to grout your lovely mosaics that you made. And when you are grouting mosaics, it doesn't really matter how small or how big, it's exactly the same principle, but obviously we're now working with little small mosaics, so I'm just going to show you how easy it is, and I'll go through step by step, and I think you'll find you'll have no problems when you come to grout your own at home. So we're starting off, and I'm using white grout because I think it works really well with Christmas decorations. It makes them nice and bright, and also when you have a small mosaic, if you grout it in a darker grout, it can dull it a little bit, but I prefer to use a white grout when it comes to especially when you're using glitter. So all I've got my grout just using an old yogurt pot and just a stick or anything you've got that you want to throw away afterwards to stir it with. And I've got some water and I've got a sponge. Now this sponge is a really small sponge. It's just what you get in the supermarket that you find. You might have one in your cupboard. Normally in mosaics, when we grout, we use as big a sponge as we can. But I find it's much easier to use a small sponge when you're mosaicing something really small like this. So I'm going to start now, and I am going to add some water to my grout. If ever you've made icing sugar, you only need a tiny amount of water at a time. So I'm literally just putting, you can see how little water I put in there. I would rather do it a little bit at a time. If you put too much water in and it's too runny, if you just leave it for a few minutes, it will thicken up a little bit. And this is the stage when you tend to add water the second or the third time, is when you can overwater it. I've done it myself so many times. So it's starting to thicken up now. You can see it is a little bit like baking a cake. You can sort of see the water starting to stick. So a little bit more. The consistency you want in the end is a bit like toothpaste, really. It's really tempting just to put a lot of water in and to save messing about, but honestly you can really overwater this really quickly. Now it's still too thick. You can see it's starting to thicken up really nicely now, so I am literally just going to add a tiny few drops in, and hopefully it'll start to look a little bit like toothpaste. Just like that, you see. So at this point, I think I'm going to add just a tiny drop more, and then you'll see what the finished grout texture should look like. You can see how quickly it became quite runny even with that drop of water. So that is about the consistency that we want. So when you pick it up, it's not dripping, or you don't want it just to drip. You want it to sort of stick. I guess it is a bit like toothpaste. Okay, so I'm sort of ready to go now. So as soon as you mix up your grout, don't leave it because it will thicken up really quickly. So let's start grouting. So before you start, make sure you've got some rubber gloves on, and you're going to test your piece just to make sure that everything's stuck on and nothing's going to drop off. So by wearing the gloves, it's to protect your hands really, because you might have little pieces of glass tiles sticking over the edge, which could be quite sharp. So just be careful. Be careful with that. So I'm checking this, I'm sort of patting it, turning it upside down, and I sort of feel confident that everything is stuck on. So now I'm going to go straight ahead. So all you do now is you get your grout in your hand like that, and put in your mosaic. I'll put it in the palm of my hand, and I'm just going to cover it all. Oh, it's lovely and messy, this job. Now you can imagine if this was really runny, this grout, it'd all be dripping down onto your table, which isn't ideal. And I'm doing the edges as well, because you want a nice neat edge of grout around there. Go all around the little bauble at the bottom. You're basically wanting to fill all the cracks in where there's no tile. Don't worry about what's going on the back of your mosaic. And there's even a little hole here where we attach ribbon. Don't worry about that either, just carry on as if it's not there. There you go. So that is all covered in grout around the edge, like that. So I'm going to put that down and have a go at this one. Now, if you're doing like 10 or 20 of these, I would probably do 5 or 6 at a time, because the grout is very quickly going to start to dry. So this one's a nice round one, fits in the palm of your hand. This is a nice easy one. You can see how I'm going around the edge. That's really important. So hopefully when you were creating your mosaic, you were mindful of not to have too many tiles sticking out over the edge, because if this is a mosaic going on your tree and your children might be putting it on the tree, you really need to make sure that that is a nice smooth area there. Okay, so you can see they are now covered in the grout. So the next step now is you have to do this next step straight away. Don't go off and make yourself a cup of tea and then come back, because you'll struggle to get the grout off. So we're going to get our sponge. So we're going to use this little teeny one, and I'm just going to put it in water in a bucket or whatever you've got, and I'm going to wring it out. You need to wring it out as much as possible so it's just damp, like that. Then I want to get my sponge, and I am going to wipe this. You can see how I've wiped it like that. Go in, wet it again. It's always better to wipe. If you were using a bigger sponge, you would just turn it over and it saves a bit of time. But you can imagine using a big sponge. It's fine, but it's not. I like to use a little sponge when I'm when I'm grouting small mosaics. I just think it's a bit more manageable. So you can see how I'm just wiping it off, going around the edge. That's quite important. Now, because these are all on wood, they're all indoor mosaics, but you still would make sure that the sides have got grout all going in the side. And the wonderful thing about grout is it all comes off where you don't want it to go. So I'm just giving the back a wipe, and you can see how it easily comes off. It's sort of like magic. It just fits in the cracks. So that is as much as I'm going to do with that one. But before I put it down and let it dry, I'm just going to check that there aren't any holes in there. Sometimes you get air bubbles coming in the grout, and that it's all quite sort of neat. If there was a little hole, you would just get a bit of grout and redo that area. And also, before you let it dry, you can see where your ribbon goes. Just poke that out with a nib of a pen or a needle or something. Just get rid of the grout so you can put your ribbon through at the end. So let's do that other one now. Again, make sure you wring all your water out of your sponge. So here we go again. So I'm just going to give it a wipe around the edge. Back in the water. Now, if you were grouting this and one of your pieces fell off, don't worry about it. It is fixable. So what you do is, say one of my berries fell off or something that you would very, very noticeable. You would carry on regardless, just pretend it hasn't happened. And then when you finish grouting, and just before you leave it to dry, make sure the area is clear of grout so you can put that piece back in later when it's dry. And then you can just repair it by putting a little grout on, just with your finger, just mix up a little bit of grout. And saying that, it's always a good idea, because you'll with your grout, especially if you came to me at the workshops and you have a bag of grout to go home with, if you leave a little bit of grout left in your bag, just a tiny bit, so if you do need to repair afterwards, you have got a little bit of grout left that you can use. But I am confident that none of your pieces are going to drop off. There we go. So you can see, again, I'm looking at this one and there aren't any air holes that I can see, and I'm happy that the grout has filled in all the cracks, and I'll just poke out that hole there so I can get my ribbon through when it's dry. I'm going to leave those now. You can leave them 24 hours, you can leave them an hour, 24 hours, it doesn't really matter. But what will happen is there'll be a film of dust go over them, and then you just get a wet cloth and then you buff it up with a dry cloth. Especially if you've got a bit of mirror in there, and they'll shine up lovely, and then they will just look like that when they're grouted. That's a finished one. So you can see the hole there where the ribbon goes. And that's it. It's easy. You'll have no trouble, I'm sure. But if you do any problems, you want to email me any questions about grouting, absolutely, there'll be a number at the very end, an email. Just get in touch, and yeah, have a nice time grouting your pieces.